Well, hello, everybody, and I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas. I have a special episode today of What is Truth, my regular weekly show with Pastor David William Parry out of London. My name is John Barnwell. I'm here in Detroit, Detroit, the Straits, and I'm bringing on my very special friend, Joe Visconti, and he's really got so many kind of accolades, I guess we could call it, that it's not always easy to describe to somebody who he might be. But he's the president of the American Shakespeare Theatre, and that is a key issue because the other day, Reverend David asked me a question about Rudolf Steiner as to his comments on theater, and I thought, well, geez, you got to talk to Joe Visconti. I mean, he's like one of the most knowledgeable people regarding that. And I had something open, but it tells me that these computers are not always happy friends of ours. They tend to give us things to struggle with. But Joe Visconti is an Emmy Award-winning producer in film, and he also has been active in many other areas, but he is a lifetime student of the work of Rudolf Steiner, as am I, and David has studied Rudolf Steiner over the years, and that's been kind of a central focus to what we're trying to do here. But as regards to Joe Visconti, he went to the University of Harvard and studied radio and television. And he went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And so I thought he'd be the ideal person for Reverend David to post his question. And of course, I have certain things waiting in the wings that I'll dip in from time to time, but I'm just curious to see what will happen when these two firebrands go to work. So first, I'm going to say hello to Reverend David. Hello, David, in the wonderful city of London, Maryland, England.
Is it? Excuse me. Yeah, good evening, both of you. It's only evening here. It's a rain-sodden, bleak midwinter as opposed to a sparkling, crispy winter. It's raining, it's pouring, all the snow has finally gone. London's turned into an ice rink. I'm half dead because of my pre-Christmas duties, which are unending, as you can imagine. And yeah, I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm a sucker. I love Christmas. I love the Yuletide. I'm looking forward to stuffing myself with mince pies. Having the biggest bit of turkey imaginable. I can't wait for all of it. My brother and I did the decorating of our house the other day, and of course, my partner and I are actually planning to move to the Outer Hebrides, and thereby hangs a tale, early next year. So it's sort of nonsensical, and I don't know. I feel punch drunk with it all at the minute, and this is my third week of recovery from flu. And I'm beginning to get suspicious. I mean, as you know, well as John knows, I don't think Joe does yet. I'm not given to conspiracy theories, but there is something genuinely odd about this strain of flu. 3 weeks later, and I'm still struggling. This is ridiculous. And my dear friends, the Arkles. Hi, Nick. Hi, Tammy, if you're watching. The son of William Arkle, the philosopher, theologist, painter. I mean, plaudits go on and on and on. And they've both gone down with it too, and are moaning about how unusual it is. So yeah, I mean that's me at the minute. And my questions to you were deliberately vague because I'm coming to the end of my new book, not the beginning, the ends. You'll have that as a New Year gift, John. An enormous tome to plough through. Bless you, thank you. Which I hope you enjoy. And I don't know. I got to a certain point the other day and thought, "What the hell am I saying?" not because I lost the thread of where the argument was going, but because there seemed to me, I don't know, I just sensed there was something missing in the overall thrust. I mean, I don't want it to be a theatre book, although it's turning in that direction despite everything I can do. I've got a publisher moaning at me on a weekly basis now. Sorry, Gwendolyn. Sorry, Gwendolyn. Um, yeah, but it can't be submitted yet because there's something askew. There's something amiss. I don't know what it is. And I'm fishing at the minute. I'm looking for. I know there's a great deal of influence of anthroposophy in the arts, and I've got some very unusual names to throw around who've been influenced by Steiner directly and/or anthroposophy as a movement. And of course, I've done my usual homework on theatre. One or two people in film I will probably leave out for the simple sense of brevity. You can't get everybody in. But no, there's something I can't put my finger on what it is. So I thought I'd fire a few questions over to you, and then was blessed with the company of Joe. And I don't quite know. I mean, what is it I want to ask at the minute? I don't know. Why have I written so much about Stanislavski? That's one thing, but that's a question aimed at me. Um, oh, no, right, right. I know. I listened to your voice messages, and I love Stanislavski. I'm really aware of your problems with Stanislavski. But darling, I am the method. I'm sorry, I am that tree, right? You know, and uh, oh no, no,
Michael.
I can't do homage. I can't do homage. Not now. I've been doing it all afternoon. And, yeah, so but it's that's the sort of thing that's getting to me weirdly. I knew there was a clash, but there's not a clash, and I knew there was a continuity, but there's not a continuity. And yeah, I know that Chekhov is meant to be the heir apparent to Shakespeare, even though from time to time I'm tempted to think it's actually Ibsen instead of Chekhov. The semi-divine Chekhov. Simply because who else starts the kitchen sink drama, which appears to be 90% of TV and movie making nowadays. But the divine Chekhov, yeah, I'll go along with all of that. But there's something that doesn't gel, and I can't work out what it is. And I'm looking forward to just getting energy. Joe, my friend, yeah, help me, help me.
Okay, so John and I were talking the other day, and it's amazing when you're put on the spot and questions come up or you start to chat, like we're two or more gathered in my name. It's amazing the answers that come that would never come. It's almost like Goethe with the power of commitment. When you make a commitment, well, when you get in a group, you're making a commitment. You don't realize it, but it's a commitment to speak and to share. And so when this came up, I just sat down to log on, and a flood of things came in just about my own personal biography, which I'll talk about later. But to kick it off, and these things are just coming in intuitively as you spoke. And here's what I heard. It's the Russian soul, and John can definitely take off on this one. The Russian soul that Steiner speaks of, whether it's Chekhov or Stanislavski, it's not instinctive as much as that they are the Russian man. He has a whole work on this. And so they do develop the drama. And I sent you something earlier because I've been piecing together things that I feel that are missing consciously, but not missing by all the great men and women in the arts, in the theater, in acting. They've all discovered it by intuition, inspiration, and which Stanislavski is a master of the inspiration. He brought it to a level. The Theater Guild in America, as we know, in 1909, 1910, 1920, started to grab a hold of Beatrice Straight, and they started to develop out of vaudeville a real theater world in the States and the colonies, because it was all flim flam before that. But it is the Russian soul and the Russian man, and I'm going to let John talk about that in a minute about that. But really, that came in very strong with me. And we're living in this time with Ukraine and all this other nonsense, which is not nonsense. It could be Armageddon, but really the Russian people have brought something to us, and actually, I'm going to if John is ready, I'll let him take off on that if he can. What Snyder speaks about the Russian soul, because I really think if we gather something to that before we go on, there'll be something really as a bedrock of why the arts and why Russia, why the sixth epoch that's coming of Russia, and what that's about. But John, do you have anything to add before?
Yes. Well, when you get into the history of anthroposophy, and I suppose I should approach it from that way because that was really the thrust of the questions that David was putting to me that gave me the brainchild to bring you into the dialogue, because you have so much experience in that area, and I've been around it quite a bit, and perhaps some of that will come up later in the conversation. But in regards to the sixth epic, we're currently in the fifth post-Atlantean period or epic. And at this time, it's the epic of the consciousness soul, and that has a tendency to focus in a Western European impulse, British, German, and the Anglo-American impulses. So that you have that as a central thrust, which is very interesting because really you have to look at theater as the child of the ancient mysteries. And in the ancient mysteries, Rudolf Steiner talks about how in the ancient world that all the arts were united and that it was all a part of sacred culture. And so you had painting and sculpture and the dramatic presentations and everything, the festivities, it's all thought of as one combined gesture to the divine. And that was the impulse of the ancient mysteries. And you have it coming in, and you have the plays of Sophocles and Euripides and, and I remember the great line, Euripides, Eumenides. But anyways, let's not be corny today. So when you get to understanding theater, really each one of the folk souls of Europe has had a specific sphere of activity where they've been kind of the central theme. You have opera in Italy, you have ballet in France, you have symphonic music in Germany, but in Britain, it centers around the theater. And one of the primary reasons being it ties into the work of William Shakespeare. And William Shakespeare, as we have here the president of the American Shakespeare Theatre, Joe Visconti, and we have Reverend David here, and he actually has two books that are related to Shakespearean theater. So I thought it'd be great to bring these together, but that issue that you're talking about regarding the sixth period, we're in the fifth post-Atlantean period. The fifth mystery is the mystery of evil. And boy, are we being given opportunity to observe what that is so we can choose how we want to position our hearts in relation to that. But when you go into the sixth period, which is far in the future, but nonetheless, we're in preparation for that culture. We're in the epic of the consciousness soul, so it has a tendency to be kind of self-centered and diffident, but it's supposed to transform itself into a spiritualized soul in preparation for the sixth period, which has to do with the Slavic people. And that is the sixth impulse, is bringing in that mystery of the second logos as the word. And so you have a kind of commitment within the Slavic people and the Russian people and all that. When they're into something, they're vehemently into something. If you talk about literary culture, the Russian people read way more books than people in Britain and the United States. I'm sorry, but they've left us far behind. They are so much more literate than we are here. They are more into the fine arts. attending ballet. It's they've done major contributions in all the various forms of art. So when you get into understanding that it was out of the Russian people that Stanislavski came with method acting, and also you have the great playwright Anton Chekhov, and then you have his son Michael Chekhov.
His nephew.
The nephew, yes, excuse me. Yeah, it's a lot to juggle here. But Michael Chekhov was interesting because Stanislavski said of Michael Chekhov at one time, he said, he's the only person that really understands what I'm trying to do. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's what he said. But see, Michael Chekhov encountered the work of Rudolf Steiner, and he realized how problematic method acting was for one's psychological health, development, and unfoldment, because it has to do with bringing into your arena past traumas and all of that to try and relive traumatic experiences, which, well, Joe will be able to tell you what is the end game with some of that. But see, Michael Chekhov, and he plays into this in more than one way, because it was, I met David through Leo Zagami. Leo Zagami's grandmother was, her and her husband were the people that brought Michael Chekhov to America. And it was in Connecticut where Joe lives. And he was associated with that organization. And so this is all weaving together. And it's very interesting because you have Anne Cumming, who is his grandmother. And she was an interesting, I don't know, you might call her a libertarian of sorts, but she hung out with many of the important people in avant-garde art, like Brian Greisen. They called each other brother and sister. Now, I don't know if you're aware a lot of the group around Andy Warhol and all of that, but she did films with Federico Fellini, and one of my best friends who passed away years ago was in Living Theater with Julian Beck. Julian Beck was the heir of the Beck shoes fortune, and he had Living Theater in Europe, and they were in all these Fellini movies, right? And so you get into it and you start looking at it more closely, you know, and these things are all kind of merging together, you know, with my association with so many of the people from the production of Hair in Detroit that was world famous as being like probably vocally the best production of Hair that went on here at the Vest Pocket Theater. So I got to chum around with a lot of those interesting people that had been exposed also to these. So it's all weaving together, but that mystery of the contribution of the Russians' commitment when they do something in the arts, that they throw themselves in it totally. If they're going to study a scholarly subject, you'll notice that many of the Russian authors have far more footnotes than a lot of their contemporaries in other cultures. So why am I saying this? Well, Rudolf Steiner says that really Leo Tolstoy is a truly representative Russian soul. And so you have this whole kind of heart culture that sees itself as being a part of the land itself.
Yes, that's it.
That's that commitment, you know, the commitment. It's like the king and the land are one. It's like that story that they give regarding King Arthur. But I want to let you chime in because there's more.
And I needed that. That's very important for David. David, I know where you're going. I'm going to give you some things today that I think, I don't know your whole book that you're working on, but it came to me intuitively. This is how this all works. Quickly, a little on my biography, and you should all research your own biography for the secrets that are there. So I'm 14 years old. My mother discovers Rudolf Steiner in 1972. 1974, 2 years later, I graduated 17 years old from high school. My uncle, Mike Sullivan, an Irishman, even though I'm Italian, married my aunt. He's one of the vice presidents of IATSE International, and he's been on the road for 20 years, member of Local 1 in New York City, the unions that actually put on the show. So I knew him, but he had come home and been on the road. He's done My Fair Lady, you name it, on Broadway. And he's tired. He's got a bunch of kids, my cousins. And he says to me in the summer of 74, do you want to work at the Bushnell Auditorium? I'm taking it over as the business agent. And I said, sure. I loved acting in theater. There was a recession, so my dad didn't have a lot of construction work. And I'm going to give you a quick biography of these early years of what I just discovered 15 minutes ago, because of this meeting we're having. And so I go to the Bushnell Auditorium at 17 years old, and I'm thrust into just with the stagehands bringing all the trucks and unloading them. And they're bringing in a show called Sergeant Pepper that the Beatles, they made a show on the Beatles. And my uncle brought it, instead of New Haven to Schubert, he brought it into Hartford. So he brings it in and he says, you want to work wardrobe department, you know? And at the time I heard from the guys, there's gay people that are in the, and I didn't care. My uncle goes, you want to make $1,800 this week? I'm like, yeah. So who cares? But I'm 17. What do you know back in the day? So I work wardrobe, and I am with the producers and the actors as they're developing the show as a person that's in wardrobe department, but I'm mixing in with all of these great people. Starkey, who had done Grease, and he's the producer. And so I was thrust immediately into that. But what I'm going to get at is what John just said. It was the earth. For me, the theater was the union. It was on the ground and the earth and the touch and that part of the theater, because the theater is, as we know, the audience, the backstage, the program. It's all aspects, as you know. And so then I moved into working Sergeant Pepper towards the end. And what happened? So Rudolph Steiner's in my mind at home with my mom. And then the lead actor for Sergeant Pepper, Billy Shears, falls off the tower. There's a huge tower, cracks his head open the night before opening night. And they have to bring in Ted Neely, who I had adored from Jesus Christ Superstar. He comes in to take the lead in one day. I'm working as his dresser. I got pictures of me. I said, you like to play around? I got a picture with me and Jesus Christ. But Ted Neely is dating June Lockhart. So they're in the audience. Again, I'm 17 years old. And they got me bouncing all over the place as the kid. And then, so I'm seeing Jesus Christ. I'm seeing Rudolph Steiner. Then the Russian ballet comes in, and I'm working that show on stage. All these confluence of things are happening, 17, 18, 19. But then Yul Brynner comes in, and this is what I want to get at. This is so important because I noticed it from Yul Brynner as a kid, and only later did I combine what Rudolph Steiner was saying. Yul Brynner would not play the theater unless they renovated and spend millions of dollars. It was a crap hole. The Bushnell Auditorium, gorgeous, and next to the state capitol in Hartford. So he makes, and my uncle brings it in. He brings a show, and he's connected with Hollywood and all of them. And they bring it in again. We robbed the Schubert in New Haven, where most people maybe watching don't know, but the Schubert is a place where most of your Broadway shows actually come out of. And also in Connecticut, we have the Eugene O'Neill Theater. George White was the founder. George is actually on the board of the Shakespeare Theatre with me. He's doing great. But what happens then, what I notice is that Yul Brynner is I'm watching him because the King and I and the things you heard. I'm still a young man, but it's that time. And so they renovate the theater. And everywhere he walks, I was watching how he did, again, Michael Chekhov's student. Okay. Yul Brynner was Michael Chekhov. So I'm paying attention because I know enough a little bit as a young man hearing my mom and just my beginning readings. That was years ago. And so I'm his dresser. I'm working with Yul Brynner for 8 days on the program. And I'm watching how he's commanding everything, where later in life I realized what I was witnessing because I couldn't interpret it. But it was the king, the presence, the demand of Yul Brynner. I've never met, and I've met everybody, Sinatra, Elvis, all of them, you name it. But no one had that thing that he picked up from Michael Chekhov, and the thing we'll discuss later, which I'm going to talk about with the 12 senses. He was in the moment, in the word, in the atmosphere, every move he made. You could tell the 12 senses of Rudolph Steiner were in he had mastered them. He had mastered the ability. We see it on TV. We don't know what we're really seeing, but he incorporates himself into the role. And every sense that Stanislavski and even Chekhov learn instinctively or inspirationally in Russia, because they're developing this this ability to incorporate, and being Italian, the sentient soul, the sentient part is very touchy, earthy, feely for me. But that all came in this morning in a flood. That Steiner, Jesus Christ Superstar, Yul Brynner, all of it, the Russian theater. I worked two different programs for 8-day runs on the Russian ballet and everything they were doing, and many more things. But what I got out of it, this morning I woke up with something to send you, and I did, about these 12 senses that Doug Gabriel and I had spoke about on a program, and they really are the center. If you delve into this, and I'm sure you can pick it up quickly and incorporate it in what you're working on, without the sense of not just taste, hearing, smell, the sense of touch, the sense of life, the sense of the word, the sense of the ego. And that's what I saw with Yul Brynner, the sensitivity. So each one of these things have been throughout methods. So there's nobody right or wrong, whether it's Stanislavski, Chekhov, Artov. It doesn't matter. What it matters is that everyone has picked up and developed pieces of what Shakespeare does. And just recently, within 2 years, I've been working with the Spring Valley Eurythmists, and we've developed a program called Shakespeare in Movement, where they actually have a team of people. COVID's kind of messed this up, but are taking the eurythmy, which again is how Michael Chekhov realizes the movement. And so when we see television and we see other things through these mediums, we are not getting what we get, as you know, from the live performances, but it is the 12 senses. I can't harp on this enough for people to pick up Rudolf Steiner's book on them. And in every aspect of anthroposophy, every aspect, or your daily life, becoming conscious of that sense of ego, the sense of temperature. That's another sense, the sense of touch. And so when I watched Yul Brynner, I go back to him. My whole life I've gone back to watching him. He rolls off the stage. He's in a play that didn't make it called The Odyssey. This 1975. It doesn't make it on Broadway. They take it there, but it was a great program. And he rolls off in his humor. He's very humorous. He broke character, and I'm doing a quick change backstage, and then he goes, "This audience." The scenes were something like his lines were something like, "And then we are dying," or to that effect. And he rolls off like, "This audience," he says to me, he feels like this audience is dying. But so there was always then that sense that there was humor. But these 12 senses, we'll talk more about other things. But if you haven't gotten into Steiner's books, with the 12 constellations, with the zodiac, and I actually sent some photos, and it's not about doctrine in my perspective, but it's more about the alignment of these things, the understanding of them, the training. Then will give everyone the rudiments to be able to take Stanislavski and Chekhov to the next level. I don't think it's been done yet, where a book has been put out, where you take their books and you take other great teachers, and you incorporate how the 12 months, the zodiacs, the senses, all of them they're literally aspects of herself. And this is what Chekhov discovers. He finds that there's blockages. He goes through all types of, not just alcohol, but problems with mental illness that were coming from something I'll talk about now. It's so important. And it has to do with the senses. If you can bear with me, David, and the audience out there. There is something that gets recreated in our life through the elemental forces and elemental beings in the elemental world that work behind the scenes. They're the stagehands in the spiritual world. The fire spirits, the sylphs, salamanders, undines, they're the stagehands. I was local 84. They're the ones that are working with the hierarchies and the darker forces to create our destinies. It's all theater. Like Shakespeare says, it is all theater. And so when you do the recalling of the effective memory, or in Stanislavski's method, you're actually going to ask these spiritual entities. These spiritual means they have consciousness, they have life beyond the inorganic. This is so important for people to realize. When we say spiritual, we mean something that has consciousness and life, but it's not organic in our sense of the organic process. And what they will do through the method is they will, my father beat me up, or go out there, look for bad things so that you can remember them and then put them on stage. You're asking these beings to come back, and you can do that with anything good or bad that's happened to you in your life and recreate that sense. It's done in church. Jesus, where is it? Jesus, where is he? Right behind me here? Right over here. Right there. Jesus. Sorry, it's backwards, but what do we think the Mass is? A recreation of the elementals in the Last Supper all the time. And there is a life force that comes into us. This is why the life force in the theater, in the audience, you can feel something coming at you. Think it's the performer or the orchestra, but what's really coming and giving you life and renewal to have catharsis or to be inspired and leave the theater live is a life force that's being generated like the Last Supper. So the methods have a way of getting an actor and driving them a little crazy when they hit their 40s. Rudolf Steiner speaks about problems and traumas in our young age, before puberty and during puberty, and how they'll come back in our 40s as psychosis and all types of problems coming from. So these certain illnesses will come back later in life, and he has timelines. That's all too deep for the theater world, but incorporating these 12 senses, again, the senses are external, the senses are spiritual, and the senses are earthbound, and that's what the touch is. And but this wholeness, Chekhov never reaches it. I have his books, I've studied them for years. He gets very close, because these lectures and things we've studied, John and I and Doug, for over 50 years, they were just coming, they weren't translated yet. So the men were doing this all intuitively, and so the problem, that's the only thing I have. It's not Stanislavski. That's all they could do, was this recalling. And it's probably the biggest problem, because then what happens is the typecasting, this is important, becomes what Chekhov calls in his book, psychological gesture. And it could haunt you, and it becomes the thing that gets people typecasted. It's not typecasted. I've done performances, and you probably have too, where you could not put down the lines in a spiritual entity that's created, as Shakespeare's done, or whatever writer has done it. When you start to write, you're creating spiritual entities, and they will come on you, and you have to have the ability to understand and to get them off of you and be able to remove them so that they don't possess you and your own will. And so we can go on for hours, but see, this 12 senses really give you that real sentient earthbound Russian thing.
Yes, perhaps I should just to summarize and give us a greater focus, that in my books, this is I'm reading out of the Arcana of Light on the Path. I have a diagram, and it gives the zodiacal order of the 12 senses and the 12 philosophic viewpoints. Now, as is the case with Rudolf Steiner, you could take one aspect of his work and make it your life's work in trying to decipher the significance, because you're talking about Rudolf Steiner, and his collected edition is 36.5 feet of shelf space. And so that encompasses what 6,786 or something like that lectures that are included in it, plus 50 published books and articles and all of that. But the theater was very central to the work of Rudolf Steiner. And so you have him building the first Goetheanum that had the largest cupola, really larger than the cupola, the dome in St. Peter's in Rome, right? And it was built without using any screws or nails or anything like that, just all tongue and groove and pegs, and built by amateur people that were members of the society, and they were creating a stage for theater productions, but that was burned down, and now they have the second Goetheanum, which was the largest poured concrete building in the world, and they do productions every year of Goethe's Faust, and they have the mystery dramas that Rudolf Steiner himself created. Well, in preparation for the mystery drama circle, he gave a cycle of lectures. I keep mentioning it over and over. It's that lecture cycle, The Wonders of the World. And in there, he shows the karmic significance of the Greek impulse, which includes theater, by the way, but the impulse of Dionysius. And obvious, within the tradition itself, it was Dionysius the Areopagite, who was the first bishop of Athens, and he was head of the esoteric Christian school that was founded by St. Paul. And Rudolf Steiner goes on to say that for Christianity to go beyond being merely just one of the denominations of the Jewish faith, for it to become a world impulse, it was necessary that it was taken up through this Greek impulse that came about through Paul. And he further says that Paul really should be seen of as united with St. John the Divine, who spent the last days of his life, and he was with the Mother Mary on the Isle of Patmos. And you see that the Book of Revelation is really, it's a theater production, is what it is. So that's what you're looking at, whether or not one chooses to see it that way, but it's this great grouping of imaginations in the tradition of the ancient mystery dramas. So, but I wanted to address, it's so easy for me to fall down the rabbit hole and describe everything I see, but I wanted to touch on the 12 senses and exactly what they are. And starting from it's a zodiacal configuration that corresponds to the 12 theme of there's 24 pairs of cranial nerves, and that's your macrocosmic aspect of the human being, the dome of the skull, the place of the skull. Our Lord was crucified at the place of the skull, Golgotha, so that it's very significant. And you have the blood within the Eucharist. The blood is the microcosm, that's the human realm, and the bread is that macrocosmic realm. That's the 12-fold realm. So we starting from Aries, we have the word sense, and then you have the thought sense, and then you have the ego sense, and then you have touch, life sense, motion sense, sense of balance, smell, taste, seeing, sense of warmth, sense of hearing. And that's your 12 senses. Now, I could digress and get into talking about how there's 12 philosophical viewpoints that correspond to each one of them. But I wanted to read this quotation from Walter Johannes Stein, who is the great Grail researcher and author of 9th century world history in the light of the Holy Grail, which centers to a large extent around the really play of Wolfram von Eschenbach, Parsifal, which was transformed by Richard Wagner into the opera Parsifal and is so important to understand. But Walter Johannes Stein was one of those young students around Rudolf Steiner that there was a time when Walter Johannes Stein wanted to attend a lecture of Rudolf Steiner's for the members, and they said, "Oh, you can't get in, you don't have a membership card." And Rudolf Steiner walks up, he overheard it, he said, "If he doesn't get in, I can't lecture." So Walter Johannes Stein is very significant, and he's the mentor of Werner Glass. And Werner Glass, Douglas Gabriel is Werner Glass's protege, and Werner Glass was the mentor of Jack Palance, Yul Brynner, Marilyn Monroe. I mean, there's so many stories we could fold into this narrative, but let's listen to what Walter Stein has to say that ties into the 12 senses. Anthroposophy is the philosophy of love. Anyone who sees it as one view of the world among many knows nothing of its true nature. Like love, it is all-embracing. It results from reading in the stars, and it subsumes all possible conceptions of the world, of which each legitimate one is accorded its sphere of influence. Thus, the fixed stars will themselves bring us the wisdom which is passed through love. Essentially, there are 12 philosophies, and others are intermediate stages, as the compass only has a specific number of designated points in space between because the others are found between them. Together, 12 ways of looking at the world provide a comprehensive view. Each is an individual perspective. Each is legitimate, but also incomplete and needs to be supplemented by the others. They represent 12 stages of selflessness, 12 philosophies. The final highest stage is the sense which perceives another I. This intuitive cognition allows us to look back at our own being as if it were a number, to embrace the other lovingly. And so you have this, and that's that impulse that we're talking about, moving towards the sixth period. It gives me chills talking about it, because Rudolf Steiner says that to move into the future, to develop into the spirits of freedom and love, we have to be able to take our own warmth, because the ego is carried in the warmth of the blood, and take that and unite it with the world warmth. And that takes place, like as Joe was saying, when two or more are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst of them.
In purest outpoured light shimmers the Godhead of the world. In purest love towards all that lives outpours the Godhood of my soul. I rest within the Godhead of the world. There I will find myself in the Godhead of the world. This comes from Rudolf Steiner's book on, I have it over here somewhere. It's got a beautiful rose on the rose cross on the front of it. But each time the sense of warmth, but if I'm not sure what you're working on, but I think this is going to be key, because I've been beating this like a dead horse on a bunch of lectures. I discovered the fact that without this 12-fold sense of ourselves in any career, in anything we do, we end up, this is what the world has done. It's fractured us to be I guess that's it. We become one-sided in our art, in our trades, in our careers, in our professions. No matter what level it is, we become one-sided, and everyone in their own biographies is a show. We're all a Broadway show, and we're looking to get the audience in. What is the audience? That reciprocity of the collective in to accept what we are, to change. And but the elemental forces, I think, are so important also, John, to wrap our heads around. They're everywhere. You'll find them in all the arts, and in so many old wives' tales. But the elemental beings right now, this is important also. If I'm not sure if David knows, or if the audience listening knows this, but there's been an arrangement. I'll call it an agreement, an arrangement, a contract, Rudolf Steiner states, between certain elemental forces and a certain dark being. I won't mention him right now, and so when we use our technology, because really when we're talking about theater performances, we have to say, yes, you didn't see it live, but so once it's in a two-dimensional space, the beings that are providing this computer, our phones, our appliances, their freedoms are being they're being enslaved through contractual agreements with darker forces. And our time, and Rudolf Steiner says that we need to love our machines, love, and recognize the sacrifice of these elemental forces that have provided this technology for what we're dealing with in the fifth epoch. But when the art form, this is so important too, the art form is going to be spoken about in live theater or street performances, juggling, I don't care what it is, and especially as an old contractor raised in the trades myself through my father, you're always aware that it's performance based. But the elementals that are locked in right now, that are working with us here to provide this, have to be acknowledged with that warmth John is speaking about. Our humanity is moving into the sub-physical realm. Some of our being is irretrievably being gathered. But if we, and I believe, if we pour our consciousness and our warmth into it, we can share the way the church founders, actually prehistoric, have built buildings out of carved stone. They've built our churches. They've taken rocks, physical realm, and caused beauty and made them into temples we're now building that in. And what does that have to do with theater? The processes of theater, when the curtain goes up, when you're walking into churches, you'll know, and you begin the music as the entrance and all those stages of a mass. If you take a look at that, and again, the elementals that are there, and this goes back to what I gathered from Yul Brenner. He wanted, and he had, the green rooms, the entranceways, his dressing rooms wallpapered in certain papers and certain colors. Certain furniture had to be brought in. He actually, it was all secret, who knew what he was doing. He was creating the environment where it was conducive for his complete being to be able to be prepared to step on a stage. I thought he was being a prima donna, and he was being, as a kid, somebody that had that whole theatrical. But in retrospect, as I see now, this in the secrets that his being, his ability, his own way to pour himself into these roles and command. And I worked alongside of it, and I felt it. I remember saying to myself, remember everything that you're experiencing. You won't understand it. Maybe later in life you will. And this comes from the training with Chekhov, the training with what John is speaking about, Werner Gloss people, all of it. And so, but these elemental forces are so important to recognize that they're always here creating the world, co-creating with hierarchies and forces. And so our theater, in our constellations, and in the what John was speaking about, these different senses from his book, are so important to learn, to understand, so that in that moment when you have that intuition on stage, or the inspiration, this is another thing important. Inspiration comes from hearing. In John's book, you'll see that in its areas. And what happens is inspiration, Rudolf Steiner states this, that music and voices can be heard on the other side. It's the only art form of singing and music that can cross the threshold directly. So this is what we don't realize. We're getting inspirations all the time, and they're coming through these senses. And I'll let John take off on that.
Well, really, Aries, that's the word sense, because hearing is Pisces. Okay, so again,
Pisces, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it gets into these subtle distinctions.
I got 3 charts going on in my head.
once you develop the concept regarding the senses, it enables you to be able to actually enter into and to be cognizant of functioning within that realm. And when you get somebody who's worked at it many, many years, like a Yul Brenner, it's a profound experience running into that.
Well, I've got one of my charts showing inspiration as Aries, a sense of hearing.
Well, there's more than one way. There's more than one way to group them together. And again, there's anthroposophy, spiritual science is very fluid. But we've been talking so long, and I'm just really looking forward to what David is going to respond with some of this.
David, go ahead.
He's been working so hard on his book, and I keep hearing about this book, and I can't wait.
David, take up.
I wonder where to begin, and I'm going to let you both down. It's not a textbook, and most of this won't be said, because I'm looking at the differences between performance and worship, and I believe they're very profound distinctions. June Lockhart, wasn't she in Lost in Space, one of my favorite programs as a child?
She was also the mother in Lassie.
Oh my God! Oh no, let's not. I'll burst into tears. We mustn't mention Lassie. Even after all these years. Oh, where do I begin? I mean, right. Number one, I've never met an actor that wasn't in continual crisis anyway. So that means nothing. Are they forced to relive past traumas? Yes, by their own psychologies every 15 minutes. So I don't think anyone's particularly to blame for conjuring dark forces in that particular case. Let me contextualize where I am at the minute. I mean, my partner is Iranian, so we're trying to get together all we need for Yalda, which is the celebration of light on the 21st, and we're trying to meld that with Christmas. And we had a very odd meeting at the church where we're wondering if we're not going to become Pentecostals, I thought we were going in an interfaith direction, but apparently we're not. So my head is literally all over the place at the minute. The book that I mean, it's nearly finished. Which I'm trying to do is this sort of, I don't know. I think John knows how I work. I rather hate the way I write. It's full of revisits and palimpsests and endless regurgitations, and that's just why it takes forever, and I hate it. But that's what it is. It will be a celebration of theatre, but it's not only going to be that. And at the moment, I'm really concerned and focused on where Alex Jones is wrong. I mean, all Madonna has to do is stub her toe on a stage, and something to do with black magic has just occurred. Well, surely not. I mean, surely not. And I don't know. I've been in so many church services in various denominations. By the way, I've got a very well received Malvolio. If anyone over there is interested, I can get into Malvolio at the drop of a hat. Was that an audition? Possibly. I've got a CV that's well and truly dusty, but I can dust it off. Yeah, I mean, my trouble with most of the churches in Britain at the minute is either they're the mouthpiece of ideology, which surely isn't Christianity, or it's performance related, which also isn't Christianity. So at the moment, my interest is, I like Quaker worship. I mean, I spent many years going to the Wandsworth Quaker meeting. I think that's about 200 years old. And, right, so I became addicted to the silence, the stillness. And I was saying to John a couple of months ago, what's the raison d'etre? What's the explanation of that? Well, probably because the one thing you never get in London is 5 minutes to yourself. You never get 5 minutes of peace. So that's probably the secret. But nevertheless, it was beautiful and gripping, and it gave you a chance to orient yourself and where you were coming from. And the fact there was nothing performance-based at all. So that's one of the things I'm sort of trawling around at the minute. I've got so much material on Rudolf Steiner at the minute. I'm wondering if I'm not extracting him from the present book and making another book later on, because there's just too much at the minute. But certainly, as it won't be a textbook, it won't be a hurrah for anthroposophy either, although it will have anthroposophical themes running through it. John is waving books in my direction again. I can't see that. An expert. I can't remember. I'm half blind nowadays. Oh yeah, Religious Society of Friends. I saw that.
Well, David, that's what Chekhov had the problem. They wouldn't print his book, which I have here, for 40 years because it was all Steiner, it was all techniques that were way over the average person. They couldn't teach it in a curriculum. Bottom line.
Well, I mean, I do think that sort of thing needs to be done. I mean, I don't know what America academia is like. If it's anything like British academia, we might as well give up the C word, civilization now, and just head for the hills. I mean, there's no point trying to pretend there's anything down the road that looks even mildly pleasant. If, however, we can juggle more than one ball at the same time, these books do need to be done, but there must be a time and a place. Somebody said at my last book, why on earth did I write it? And that was the only question that stumped me. Because, I mean, actually, there's a reason behind it. I don't know if you know, Joe, I actually spend a lot of time in Russia and Central Asia. Central Asia is my great passion. I'm going to bore you with it because I haven't done the spiel yet. I've walked down the road where Aladdin went to school and got into his first fist fights. I've been to the mosque where the imams put the gin in the bottle with the curse of Suleiman on his left cheek, so he became a slave to the lamp. I mean, these places are magical. They a different way of thinking, a different way of using the imagination. And certainly the minute you're outside of Anglo-American empiricism or pragmatism, the whole thought world, the whole psychological, as I'm sure you're both aware, the whole psychology of the environment is completely different. I mean, the last time I went to the Bolshoi, which was wonderful, I'm not saying it's not. I mean, after half an hour of sitting in small wooden chairs and being told it's tradition, and me saying, "Can we break tradition just for once, please? I get very bad arthritis," and everybody's smiling at me like, "Oh, poor old soul," but he just had to grin and bear it because it's a major achievement, which it was. I mean, but the trouble is, I came out half crippled 2 hours later. Um, we do need books that are academic in the true sense, most of which academic books are not now. We need books in my sort of, dare I say, Arto, dare I say, Strindberg sort of sense. I mean, my new book will be much more akin to Inferno by Strindberg than it will be to A Theory of Theatre and Steiner's contribution. Although, obviously, since it's going to be rather a large tome, those things will be mentioned. But as I say, one of the things behind my questions at the moment is where I add Occam's razor. And do I think, right, okay, there's so much material that it's simply not the book I want to write at the minute. That is a different project for a different time.
Volume one, volume two. But what you just said is important. You just said something so important about freedom. Freedom and spontaneity versus the structured, which turns into mechanization on stage. And you've felt that before. It loses. So we delve. This is Rudolf Steiner. You know this. We're moving with too much freedom, too luciferic, and you lose track of what the hell you're doing. It's a free for all. Too much structure and mechanization and monotony brings in Ahriman, which is death forces. So we're constantly in academia, they're trying to teach something and they're teaching it in structure form. And until you move past the journeyman stage of anything, you're going to be trying to football. Tom Brady, the same thing. He's trying to, they can't get the team to get, look at it right now. He can't get his team to do what they did 2 years ago. They've lost that ability to take the structured concepts, which is the lines if it's a theatrical performance, and actually be rhythmic enough and freedom enough to run the routes and to do the living thing. I guess that's it, the living theater, the living thing. And you felt it in the businesses, careers, again, of the same way. Why don't I have any, what does Steiner say? Well, I'm lukewarm. I don't have any, it's a word, what the heck's that word? Not encouragement, but excitement about life. And we lose it so because these forces, Rudolf Steiner speaks about left and right of the aisle, are pulling us to and fro. And if we think we balance them, we don't know how to do that through the Christ Center. We don't know that Christ is alive. Christ is living. It's not a dead thing, a guy on the cross. I mean, Jesus over here, but not on a cross like that in our daily life. So you'll find that throughout everything, but that seems to be a problem. But you should just do volume 1, 2, 3, 4 or something. What are you laughing at? Right?
I think I've already got the book after that planned. That's the trouble. I'm meant to be finishing a D Philos at the Norwegian Scientific and Technical University. I don't trust British universities now. Even PhDs. I'll just finish this point, John. I mean, it's kids stuff. It's kids stuff. But I'm meant to be writing on Dorothy Day and anarchism, so I think I'd better get that done next before they kill me or send out some Norwegian hitmen. John, I'm handing over to you.
Yes. Well, I think that there's like the birth pangs that go into any truly creative endeavor, and I think that's descriptive of what you're going through. There's a word that fits in here, palingenesis, and the idea of palingenesis is used in lots of things: philosophy, theology, politics, biology. It means to be born again, or recapitulation, and it's a key in understanding, because when you start creating something along a certain line and you start connecting to the milieu that's your personal association with that, things come up but you're readdressing them in a way, because even though those circumstances exist in your past, so that they have a certain static sense, they've already taken place, but you have changed. See, and that's the real mystery here, is to be livingly participating in that part of you that is in a continual process of metamorphosis. It's something that's called beholding and becoming. It's an active state. It's not a passive state.
David, do you have a title for this book? Don't answer that yet. I just had something come to me. You ready?
It's
You
just
ready?
this weird. It's this weird way I work, Joe. I actually couldn't. You know, if my mother on her deathbed wouldn't get the title from me.
Okay, I got this came into intuitively to me. Maybe it's just the subject matter. You heard the theory of everything. Well, how about the theater of everything? That is the title, The Theater of Everything.
Well, I sort of do.
I want ownership.
That's why I can't use the title. I mean, you know, I do confess. I mean, you know, I mean, my other great passion is theatre. You know that. But you know, and there will be more than one book on theatre, and probably centering around the great luminaries of theatre as I understand them. I mean, my love. Oh God! Now we're getting into sort of typical British bulwarks. You know, my love is serious theatre, whatever that means. Although, as a performer, curiously, my reputation tends to be in comedy. I don't know quite how that happened, but why not? You know, and I was saying to John the other week. I mean, you know, I'm probably the reincarnation of Henry Fielding, and I'd love to put on some restoration dramas next year. I'm getting the hair for it. But I don't know. There's just so much. Right. This is there. You both managed to isolate what my problem is at the minute with the new book, which will be finished by the end of January. That's the final ultimate deadline. I feel swamped. That's part of the problem. I feel swamped with information, and I don't know how to apply my Occam's razor at the minute. And I've got to, because there's a deadline.
You said something that I think swamps you. This is important. You said serious theater. I remember I was doing many performances when I came back out of New York here, West Hartford, across from the Mark Twain House in Farmington Avenue in Hartford. There was a theater called the Hartford Children's Theater, and I did adults. We did, you name it. But they had a small, beautiful Victorian home that was renovated, and the theater held 75 or 80 people. And I'm like, wait a second, I want to, the other theaters. Well, I'm cast in this leading role as a caterpillar in this beautiful, fantastic, Perfect Beauty was called. Original, it was musical, and I sing in it, and I sing these certain things. But I'm getting at this. I was dissing it because I'm like, wait a second. But you try standing on top of 70 people. Serious theater? Nothing's more serious than just performing right out in the street in front of a few people. You have to create the theater. And so, what is serious theater?
I think we've got to be, even though I think it's a stuffy designation, serious theatre and non-serious theatre, I'm really loath to abandon that because now we're reducing everything to a laugh, to a gag, and surely that's not really appropriate for certain materials. And it's really not helpful in the great tragicomedies, because nowadays in Britain, I'll finish, I promise, John. It's the comedy aspect that's emphasized, and you forget the tragedy. I mean, one of the worst things I've seen in years was a year or so ago, The Master Builder at the National Theatre, where basically they're looking at the dissonances in the play, and there are people scratching themselves because they've been walking up mountains, and the audience dutifully laughs, and everybody feels better when they leave at the end. Is that how you're meant to feel? Is that really what you're meant to feel? I thought basically the director needed a slap because the whole of Ibsen had been betrayed on a stage in front of me for an hour and a half. And is it good to have a laugh? Yes, but not at everything and not all the time. And surely that minimizes the much more difficult gift of comedy. I agree. I played a caterpillar once, and I'm very proud of it. And it was a pain in the ass to be that caterpillar, I'm telling you. You know, and it's one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I was a praying mantis.
Right. Wait, the gauntlet's down now, sir. I'm gonna have to think of other stories. But, you know, the point is, you know, are the reactions appropriate to my caterpillar the same reactions that should be given to the master builder? I saw a quote at the bottom. I meant to read the quotes out when John, because I can't see them on my laptop. Douglas Gabriel came and went again. Great job, my brothers. The divine drama is the stage of our ascension or devolution. Oh my heavens! No, it's too close to Christmas. I need something cheerful, Douglas. I'm sorry.
Well, I'll tell you something cheerful, David. It's magical imagination. That is the living thing. This is magical. We've talked about the elementals and all that, and they're all real, etc. But it is a magical. This is where the right and the course and the beauty of nature when the spring and the trees pop out and the buds pop out and the birds sing. It is a magical. Performances are magical in our daily life, our daily bread. The theater just brings it to a place where it's saying something where we all can come together, like in the church, where we come together to receive something.
Yeah, but as I say, we got to be careful of too close a parallel to that. I mean, I don't know if John's a conspiracy theorist or not. I've never asked him. I think there are elements of that there, Mr. Barnwell. I think there are elements of that there. You know, every time I see Alex Jones, and I've actually a lot of time for Alex Jones. I don't know if that's PC to say that anymore, but I have a lot of time for Alex Jones. And of course, Leo is one of our friends, so that's a different. I just don't believe every time Hollywood puts on a song and a dance, it's a dark ritual in disguise. I'm sorry, I don't. And if it's that amateurish, then we've got nothing to worry about at all. No, I mean, I've had the honor to have been invited through the years to genuine occult rituals. All of which were successful. I didn't say I participated, but I did say I was a guest. And it strikes me the atmosphere, the intention, the whole thrust of what was happening in those interactions was entirely different from theatre. Indeed, I mean, even if you're thinking of taking the Mass, are you there to be entertained? If you are, get out. Get out. Don't insult the priest or Christ. Get out. Or are you there to imbibe the blood and the body of a god? You know, we've got to be really careful because I don't think these things are so subtle beyond a certain point. I've got to hide my partner again, excuse me. And, you know, oh, it's one of those days. I knew it was when I got up this morning. And you okay, right? I think, you know, what looks subtle on the outside, there are so many physical correlates, there are so many physical parallels. Surely it must mean, but really, if we sit back and think about it, no, it doesn't. And the difference in intention, the difference in style, the difference in overall aim and goal, it really must be borne very closely in mind. Which is why I'm right. The second problem I'm having, that the Steiner material strikes me at the moment as actually blurring the distinction as opposed to explaining the distinction. So I'm being swamped by information, point one. And maybe I think this must be a separate book. Point two is we've had enough of the blurring. It's time to start saying A is not always B, and these are the reasons why. John is waggling his finger at me, so I'll shut up.
Well, if there's any blurring, it's in your cognizance of the process itself. And that's part of the challenge within anthroposophy. And I've been humbled a countless number of times because I get to a point where I think, I figured it out. I understand what Rudolf Steiner is getting at. And then I'll bump into a lecture and I'll realize that I was 180 degrees off kilter in my mental description of what I thought he was attempting to convey. And so Now, this is going to take a minute because you opened this door, okay? And that's why so much of my creative work, like if you look at my books, the Arcana, the Grail Angel starts off immediately with a question. And if you look at what's the title of this show, it's a question, okay? So there's an open set going on here. And don't think you've figured it all out. That's my basic premise, is that I'm working on the premise that I don't have all the information. And so I'm going to keep moving. And it's a process of development. And that's I guess this is a good point to bring in the figure of Marilyn Monroe, because it'll give us a very objective lesson regarding this. And Werner Glass, who Douglas Gabriel, who I just did some really great installments in the Interview with an Exorcist series. Douglas has overturned more corridors in pursuit of anthroposophy than anybody I know personally, going all over Europe, North Africa, Middle East, America, trying to find out what these things mean, and continually having to revise his view. And so when you start looking at it, it's a humbling thing. So I'm far too reticent to come to a conclusion like you did there. But I'm going to share with you something that's really fascinating. It's
Just have to
Marilyn
say,
Monroe was part of the theater circle.
I didn't mention a conclusion. I think I've been misunderstood.
Okay, good.
What I was talking about processes and procedures. Yeah, but no,
because you said
there are no.
You thought that Rudolf Steiner was blurring the distinction.
Yeah, I think in his writings, and I'm not talking about the writings. I'm talking about the realities of performance or worship. And I think maybe even if it's not Steiner,
I see
it's
what
the
you're getting. Yeah, I see the point you're trying to make. And I guess what we're going to have to do is we're going to have an episode regarding Iamblichus, because it's in the work of Iamblichus and Proclus too, but where you get that whole idea of the special role of theurgy, which is the sacred drama. And it is of a different nature than just theater. Although what Joe's trying to say is that in being able to bring that level of self-awareness, that will instill your work with that kind of depth that, like he's trying to describe with Yul Brynner. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, but when you're around certain of these people, you just have to step back and go, whoa. It's like Rudolf Steiner talks about in ancient Rome. He said, were you in ancient Rome? And I'm paraphrasing, and I don't even remember which lecture it was, but he says, were you in ancient Rome and you came across one of these great individuals at that time? Because really ancient Rome was the time of the individual. If you go to ancient Greece, it's like people thought of themselves as a member of the community. I'm an Athenian or I'm a Spartan. And so it hadn't really consolidated into the idea of a citizen as it did in Rome. But he said, in Rome, were you to come across a Mark Antony or Julius Caesar and saw them before you, there would be no question in your mind as to the level of being that is taking place at that moment in that individual, because they're so fully incorporated into themselves. And Joe, go ahead.
David, so we'll go from Rudolf Steiner down to the street, Martin Scorsese, all right? Let's move away from that for a second. The big question will be, what is the reason for theater? What is the reason for acting? What are the reason for movies? Well, let's move this way. Forget everything we know about Steiner, Stanislavski, Chekhov. Let's get right down. I'm Italian. Everywhere I go, if I'm around people that aren't Italian, they're talking The Godfather like I'm in the mafia. Okay? Never mind the stereotype. The reality is that movie so impressed them, and they're not from the culture of Italians. Didn't impress me that much. but this is important. It's not about judgment here. They really went into something, and it's Scarface, Serpico, Take any of these movies that are really casino, where you're moving into a lifestyle in a world you would not normally go into to feel something without any spiritual nothing. And what happens to people? What did they go to that movie for? To become somebody else? Because they definitely were walking amongst the mobsters in Casino. They were with the mobsters in Godfather. Apocalypse Now. You're in the jungle. Everyone, what is actually occurring? Let's forget anything about spirituality, anything. This is be materialist atheists at this point right now. All right. We all have done this when we were little kids, pretending we were Sinbad when we were small, or pretending we were whatever. What were we doing? We went into a world, I can just say this from the regular world, and we experienced, even as a child, you easily became it, but your combat helmet on, we were playing combat, or cowboys and Indians, whatever. What was happening? I'm not going to answer this. Like John said, he starts with a question. What, David, I'll let you answer this. What is really happening to people that go into every aspect? I don't care what the movie, the culture, the race, you name it. We come out with something. Why? What is the purpose of all of that? You tell me.
Well, no, my new book will tell you, and I'm not going to talk about it until it's finished.
David, let me just interject. This is the guy that should write. Okay, I'll write a foreword, but he has to do a preface in your book.
I'm already being told it's far too long, and why do I have to put Gwendolyn through this particular process of torture every particular time? I would love you both to be involved. You know that. I mean, Joe's a new friend and colleague. Any friend of your brother's a friend of mine. I'm totally jealous of that. Oh, yeah.
It's reincarnation. David, I'll answer it for you. I'm going to walk over you. It's reincarnation. It's being able to be somebody else and experiencing being somebody but ourselves, and the joy and the intrigue and the excitement of delving into those worlds and liberating ourselves from what, especially later in life, that we've been ground into an existence and all our karma and destiny. It's totally different for young people, but it is the ability to live through someone else. It really is, and have experiences.
That was slick. I'm still not answering, and maybe that's not the conclusion I arrived at.
Can I interject here? The best example I can think of amongst contemporary actors, when you get into it and you look at his body of work, it's absolutely astounding what Gary Oldman has done. Okay, now that's an actor. That is a real actor, because seriously, he has a different voice in every movie he does. Okay, now I was just absolutely aghast when I finally got to see him in an interview, and his voice, that his day-to-day voice, is completely different from any of his characters, and it was even in a different pitch range. And I went, oh, this guy's too much, And if you go through all the work that he's done, he's so transformative. He's like a chameleon, I don't want to start reading off that list, but I wanted to share this thing before we run out of time about Marilyn Monroe, because she's has such a special place, and Werner Glass was her mentor in anthroposophy, and Werner Glass was in Hollywood in that milieu, the Michael Chekhov school, and also with Stanislavski people out there, and he's very active in theater, but one day he got a call from Marilyn, and she was distressed, and she asked if he could come by and spend some time with her, and he said he couldn't, because he had to do a lecture that night, and that was the day she passed away. And so we'll never know really what really happened, but I suspect foul play, and it's kind of in keeping with some of the issues that are going on concurrently with the JFK files and all of that. Another subject that we won't get into here, but I wanted to share with kind of a window in her relationship to anthroposophy and Rudolf Steiner's work. And there was a book that was published in 1969 a biography of Marilyn Monroe called Norma Jean, The Life of Marilyn Monroe by Fred Lawrence Giles. It's published by McGraw-Hill out of New York. And in the very end of the book, on pages 331 and 332 of a 333-page book, it says, and I quote, "Some years before her death in December 1964, Dame Edith Sitwell had spent a winter in Hollywood. A meeting between the poetess and Marilyn was arranged by a monthly magazine. It was thought their opposite personalities would throw off some journalistic sparks. No one could have foreseen that they would become immediate friends, nor could anyone have known that their deaths would be marked in an almost identical way. While their legends were growing in their lifetimes, they had been taken seriously by too few, too late." By the time she met Dame Edith, Marilyn had come a long way. If she had not been moving in an atmosphere, much of it self-created, so removed from her beginning, they might have had nothing in common. But when the introductions were over, these two new and unlikely friends were left alone and began talking of Rudolf Steiner, whose personal history, The Course of My Life, Marilyn was reading at the time. Dame Edith was to remark later on Marilyn's extreme intelligence. And so you have really a profound take on somebody who many people might, they might just dismiss her as only pretty. What a pity that they might thought her to be superficial. I get the same. I used to go to dinner with Vertiglas after a class. We'd take him down to the Howard Johnson's where I could ply him with questions regarding anthroposophy, and he had commented about that, her brilliant mind also. And well, you look at the people that she hung out with, she was able to keep up with them, and she came out of the most difficult circumstances. It's just amazing. And when you see her exposure to Michael Chekhov, and it was through Jack Palance that she came into that circle, and the transformative nature of that work and how much she had thought it had helped her own personal growth and development. And so it's very much in keeping that again, as the title of this show is What is Truth, Part 107, Theater as a Path to Truth. And it's through truth that we're going to find ourselves.
And Marilyn also knew, this is so important, people don't realize this, she knew, and she portrays it in some of her, some books, I don't remember the names of them right now, but you can Google it to find out, that she was able to show a friend, you want me to see, you want me to put Marilyn on? You want to see Marilyn? Watch. And then she goes right in, she puts the spirit of Marilyn Monroe. She knew the difference between who she was and what her persona that was created by her in Hollywood to be. So which meant she didn't lose herself within this. She knew she was putting it on, and she knew, like Yul Brynner, they were taught these things. And who are you going to tell back then when the church was so strong in the 1950s and talk about spiritual Rudolf Steiner and occult practices when right in part of your masses and your novenas, it says, I will not read any works of anything of the occult. Hello, I give you Rudolf Steiner. So you couldn't talk about those in those times if you wanted to. It was, you want to talk about black magic? It was considered black magic, but she did know the difference when she put that role on, that persona on, and took it off. She was trained that well.
Again, I think it's unwise to give the church too much of a pasting. Doug, since some of the greatest occultists in history were churchmen, Douglas Gabriel Werner Goss was a graduate of the London School of Acting (Dramatic Arts). And John and I have said on previous episodes of this particular show that we're both aware that certain very high-placed Catholics actually collect and openly read Steiner's books and very proudly say it's a higher form of anthroposophy is a higher form of Catholicism.
Well, I meant back in the day, David. I meant back then.
Yeah, you still got to be careful of that. There is no black and white. Everything's a sort of greyish melange, isn't it? And if I can sit here and name churchmen now from that period and way before, some of whom, of course, went to the stake for saying no, that's wrong. Sorry. We've got to be really careful, and the church is having.
Well, I don't know. I have to disagree with you. Being gay, Rock Hudson, you couldn't be gay. You couldn't talk occult. You couldn't do these things in the 50s publicly.
I am openly gay. I live with my Iranian husband.
No, I know that. But what I mean is back then. I'm talking about the time.
I said it back then. It didn't stop me getting this. It depends who you're talking to. It depends what the community is that you're dealing with. Not everybody in the church is a mindless Neanderthal that completely resistant to the forces of progress or higher consciousness. Certainly, I mean, I'm not speaking about American Christianity for the simple reason I don't understand it and don't want to, particularly from what I've seen of it and heard of it. But that is not the European experience. If you think of the British Neoplatonists, where would the Church of England be without them, John?
Well, you have to keep in mind that so much of American culture is about the Pilgrims and the really kind of far more uptight Protestant branches of Christianity, than you'll find in Britain. Even though they're there, they have a stronger role, and so you get this streak of fundamentalism. But don't let that stop you. I mean, there are over 35,000 denominations registered with the U.S. government for 501c3 status. So you say, okay, well, that's a lot of different vantage points by which one can approach these Christ mysteries. And most of the commentary that I've seen in derision of Rudolf Steiner reveals its lack of knowledge regarding the work of Rudolf Steiner, usually within the first sentence or two. And so they don't even, I remember reading this one book, and this guy's like putting himself forward like an expert. He describes Rudolf Steiner as a Viennese Jew. It's like, wow, that's an interesting take. He was an altar boy when he was a young fellow, so again, what is truth? We want to get to this and that, and we're only going to get there if we give ourselves permission to have a healthy suspension of disbelief, as Rudolf Steiner once said. And that's the way one has to approach anthroposophy. The key.
Well, we can see that you just put the word theater, TRE, up on your description, and you didn't make the error of putting an ER, the two different theaters.
Well, because I defer to the Brits. Theater, as I was just trying to describe early on, the opera is Italy and ballet is France, and then you have theater. Well, that's Britain. I mean, there isn't anybody of any intelligence that would deny that the real birth of what we know as theater, and that's theater, TRE. It's not TER. A theater, TER, is a building. That's like a movie theater.
Yeah, but you knew the difference.
Yeah, there's a difference. Well, that's the thing, is minutia matters. And that's why I like Gary Oldman. He's into minutia. That guy is low. He's like granulating. He's really getting beneath the surface of the character. Like, how does this person react to smells? How do they react to the lilt in their walk and the spring in their step? And there's so much tactile memory that's associated with all those. Really, they're gifts of the spirit. And I have to, because of the tack of this conversation and the limited time, I wanted to make sure that I got in an understanding that's very important to approach the understanding of spiritual science. Because Rudolf Steiner says that when one has an idea, there's being behind that idea, actual living being. And when you are relating to an idea, it's bringing you into relationship with other individuals that are relating to that idea. it's like an egregore. There's this group elemental beingness that inhabits all these things that are constructed within our experience. And so that's a key for understanding the show I did the other day I did 2 shows yesterday with Douglas, and we got into talking about relics, holy relics, and their role within the ritual of the church and all of that. And that idea that I just described is so much important, because not all those relics are real, but that doesn't diminish the significance, because it has to do with the coming together around a shared idea that creates a certain community within the realm of ideas. And so whenever 2 or more are gathered together in my name, I am in the midst of them. You see that in theater, one is given the opportunity to have a shared experience, and that you're able to build this dynamic with your audience, however big it may be. But my contention regarding contemporary media, they found it's much cheaper to have reality television, which is like a slap in the face of theater, because there's really no prep. They just stick a bunch of so-called celebrities in a room and have them bang their heads together. That's another thing altogether.
I know we're running out of time. I'd just like to we're going to close with one thing. The church, the mass, God, theater, there's the one common thing we see, not to put them together, because I know David he sees through that, is it's transformative. There's a transformation in both. And one is led by the hope of a hierarchy, a God. Another is led by men, but there is a transformation, no less. It's the purpose of theater.
We're getting near the end of our show here, and I didn't want to get there without, first of all, thanking some of the people that have made this endeavor possible through their generous support. And that's, of course, Tyler and Douglas Gabriel, and Vadim and Vivian and Tim and Neil and Christian and Mark, and Maud and Drupman and Laura and Paula and Rick and Michael and Beth and Anil and Fred and Istar and Anna and Russell and Mike and Lee and Kyle and Inamira and William and Ray and Whitney and James and Marilyn. And there's been all these people. So there's a community, that there's some organization of individuals that are sharing something within the realm of ideas. And so in light of that, then we have to go into David Parry himself, Reverend David, and he's the author of 3 books that are available on Amazon. And here's The Grammar of Witchcraft, which is a Shakespearean study. And it's not a grimoire. And it's marvelous when you realize that you have a guy who's really a master of language. This guy can write. I mean, really. And his Shakespearean poetry, Caliban's Redemption, they keep telling me that's not him on the cover, but I don't know. And of course, his major work thus far is Mount Athos.
I'm interrupting. It's not me. I'm interrupting. It's not me, because I'm fatter than the guy that was on the front of that book.
And his major work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented partner of his, Daniela Hadi Irandust. And Daniela himself has a book on the philosophy of education towards an anthroposophical view. And those are all available on Amazon. There's links regarding them below. But you can also download a free digital version of Daniela's book. And there's also a free PDF available on my link below. I have my academia link, and you can get the forward to my second book, which is available on eBay, The Arcana of Light on the Path. with a foreword by William Bento. You can download that for free on the Academia link below. My first book is The Arcana of the Grail Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail, a study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order. And it has a foreword by Douglas Gabriel and a great many diagrams, primarily based on the diagrams that were hand-drawn and watercolored by Ehrenford Pfeiffer and were found in an old box of books. And I took those and I created there's just a ton of diagrams laying out the cosmology of Rudolf Steiner, which it's important to understand that Rudolf Steiner's cosmology is that which gives this idea of metamorphosis a context. And there are many schools of esotericism that give you all these structures of the mind and the levels of the soul and all that, but they don't bring into the picture the concept of time. There's only three primary authors I can think of that really address that, and that's Madame Blavatsky, C.G. Harrison, and Rudolf Steiner. And Rudolf Steiner had said in his lectures around Eastertide, he said that Christ has given us back time. And so it's important, if we don't want to just become space beings and therefore cancel ourselves out and just become two-dimensional entities, we want to be able to bring ourselves within the understanding of the metamorphosis of time. And so that's something critically important, I think, in understanding this little conversation we're having here today. And if you want to buy us a cup of coffee for Reverend David, it's paypal.me/D Parry 777, and for myself, it's paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And I'm accustomed to having Reverend David consecrate our efforts with some form of prayer.
Well, I'll interject with that comment again in case people missed it. That is not me on the cover of that book. I'm far fatter than the model that was on the cover, a Polish model. It's a long story. I'm sort of Pickwick. You're pear-shaped. You go down, then it gets larger and larger and larger. So no, it's not me on the front of that book. So much has been said. What a wonderful show we've had today. It's been an honor to be with my dear friend John again. It's been an honor to be with my new friend Joe. I feel like auditioning. Don't worry, it's on its way. I don't know how to do it yet, but I will think of something. It's been an honor and a privilege to be with our little family again on YouTube and any other social media with the anthroposophist, the theosophists. Not always easy to say when your teeth are going. It's just been wonderful that we've all had this chance to be together again on the last Sunday of Advent. We're approaching the longest night. Astrotheology was forbidden by the church, actually, at one point, along with the three wise men that were practitioners of it, but it survived. The longest night in which we wait the coming of the light. Let's remember as we approach Christmas, which is just around the corner, that there's actually more to it than the Yuletide, and the Yuletide I love no end. But Christmas promises us a birth in our hearts, a birth in our minds, and a birth in our souls of new hopes, new light, and evolution ahead. My friends, may you be blessed by that Christ light in every part of your organism and spirit until we meet again. Amen.
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 Joe, I can't thank you enough for coming in on short notice and in a sense bailing me out, because I have such deference to people such as yourself within a discipline that I've been right next to, but I was far too distracted with my musical endeavors to really enter into theater. And although I did consider it when I was young, but I never ran down that path, but many of my friends did. And so there's plenty of food for further endeavors here. But again, I want to thank you, and I want to thank everybody for showing up. I think this has been a very special episode that's contribute to the joy of the Christmas season. So again, of course, I don't want to forget to thank Pastor David William Parry. What a remarkable individual. And I want to thank Leo Zagami for introducing me to him in the first place. And I recognized immediately somebody who has a gift. And so with that being said, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.